All right. I think the microphone's working. We're recording. It's 10:30. Let's do it. Hi, everyone. My name's Catherine. I work for the Student Learning Support Service. And today I'm going to talk to you about some study skills that will hopefully help you if this is your first semester of uni. We'll talk about some time management skills. But moreover, we're hopefully just going to give you a bit of a head start for what you can kind of expect for university. So I'll start by acknowledging that we're teaching and learning on the lands of the Kaurna people and pay respects to the elders past and present. So as you would have learned from Grace, my colleague, we are the Student Learning Support Service. If you weren't here for the last session, we provide essentially learning support for students across a lot of different modes. If you are interested in kind of learning what those are, Googling SLSS Flinders will get you all the information that you need. But let's go ahead with essential study skills for uni. So what we're going to be covering today is thinking, reading, writing, referencing. Now, I'm only going to go over these briefly. I'm going to kind of introduce you less to how to achieve these skills, but more what the skills are and what the expectations are for you at university. So hopefully you won't be surprised by a first assignment. And then we'll be spending most of our time thinking about time management. So how we can make sure that university is as stressless as possible for your first semester. So I am going to throw a lot of information at you up top, but that's okay. If you want me to slow down, put your hand up. If you would like to clarify, feel free to ask me a question. So let's start with critical thinking. Now, critical thinking is the cornerstone of all of the learning that you will do at university. It's something that you're expected to do in any discipline, and it will help you with your reading, your writing, your thinking, your referencing, your assessments, all of it. So critical thinking is essentially the process of staying as conscious as possible of our thought processes. So also confronting and interrogating our beliefs, and objective, or as close as we can get to, objective analysis and evaluation. So it's the heart of university study, and it helps us to formulate constructive arguments. So at university, lecturers want to know what you think about something and how you reason with the evidence that you have been given. So the key to productive thinking at university is critical thinking. It can be challenging as it requires us to stay conscious of our thinking, and we need to ask ourselves why we believe particular things and what has informed that belief. But it is a process that will only enrich your learning as you move through your degree, and it helps you in university and also in your day-to-day life. So our work as critical thinkers is to determine what we can accept as true and what requires deeper scrutiny. So when can we accept a fact or an argument at face value? When should we look more deeply at the evidence provided? And how is a fact being used to tell a bigger story? And the reason why critical thinking is so difficult is because it is easy to be critical, but thinking critically isn't easy. And there are multiple barriers that we have to come up against when it comes to reasoning objectively. So to kind of discovering the truth of something or to drawing appropriate inferences from facts. So what appears to be the case isn't always the case. So we have this kind of appearance-reality distinction. Our perceptual apparatus, so our eyes, our kind of sensory apparatus, are easily tricked, so we need tools to improve it. It's hard to be objective because we obviously see things from our own perspective, and we reason from our own perspective as well. We also select information based on prior beliefs and biases, so we have confirmation biases, and also we are prone to logical fallacies. We all are. But your job kind of going into university is not necessarily to dismantle or destroy all of these concepts in one go. It's to be aware of them so that you can understand how to argue competently, because the majority of what you will be doing at university is arguing. And when I say arguing, I don't mean fighting, I mean reasoning. So at university, academic arguments are one of the ways that you hone and develop your critical thinking skills. Constructing an academic argument requires you to think about pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses of particular ideas or theories, and it also involves critiquing ideas and unpacking them. So this is a lot of what you will do in your tutorial settings, in your workshop settings, in any setting that includes you having open discussion with your classmates. Essentially, you will be asked to engage in the process of critique and in the process of argumentation. And the goal of this is not to fight your classmates, even though I did that a lot in my undergrad. That is not the goal. We are not trying to fight our classmates. What we are trying to do is kind of critically understand not only our own theories, but the theories that we are being taught. So you are always encouraged to not only critique your own beliefs, but the beliefs of those that are teaching you, of those that are writing the research that you're reading. So the way that we construct an academic argument is claim, justification, and the way that you justify is through evidence. So an argument at university is claim, justification. The claim is a claim or a conclusion. The justification is supporting premises, so reasoning or logical connectives with evidence used to support this. You can think about creating an academic argument as if it is a court case, and that you are a lawyer and you're arguing that your client is innocent. So your claim is that your argument is that your client could not have done the crime. Your justification is because they weren't there at the time the crime was committed. And the evidence might be security footage showing them somewhere else. So essentially, the way that we want to construct our arguments is we want to have our premise, we want to have our justification, and the way that we justify is via external evidence, which is why referencing and research is so important at a university setting. You can expect that the majority of your assessments will ask you for references at a university level. So critical thinking is really our capacity to understand and evaluate the work of important researchers, the capacity to critically analyse literature, and that includes identifying and analysing arguments, evaluating logic, evaluating evidence. So where have they come to these conclusions? Why? Through what means? Assessing knowledge claims to see how strong or weak or convincing they are. And then also the capacity to reason positively in an academic environment. And positively in this context doesn't mean that you agree with everything or that you're not being critical. It simply means that you are able to come up with a constructive argument. So making your own claims, presenting strong arguments, acknowledging debates, and then also acknowledging limitations. So this will make up, if you are writing an argumentative essay, if you are asked to engage in debate in your university degree, which you likely will be, this is what will make up the majority of that marking rubric. So we need to be able to make our own claims, present those strong arguments, and acknowledge debates, limitations, our own limitations, etc. So let's go on to reading at university, because if we have our critical thinking skills, we know that we need to be researching, we need to justify those claims with evidence. The way that we get that evidence is through reading. At university, there is a lot of reading that you will be doing. So my first question to you is, I suppose, how do you read? I personally, I'm an audiobook listener, and I'm also a big skim reader, which isn't always the best way to go when it comes to academic reading. Does anybody else have a particular tactic of their own reading? You annotate your books. You're going to be good at this. Does anybody else just not read at all? And that's okay if you don't read. Okay, everyone in here reads, or at least they don't want to admit that they don't read, which again is fine. So we have a lot of different ways that we can engage in the process of reading. And when we're reading casually, when we're reading for leisure, we don't necessarily have the same amount of pressure on the information that we're intaking because we don't necessarily have to use that information later or in the same way. So some people read very slowly, some people read very fast, some people skim like me, some people annotate. And when we read for pleasure, it's a passive process, most likely. And what we need to do when we're reading at university is that we need to read actively. So the way that we do that is to read with a purpose. So essentially that means that you're going to be asking questions of the reading as you are doing it. So what do you need to get out of this reading? You might be given some readings that are designed to be discussed in tutorials along with discussion questions, so you'll want to read with those in mind. Use these questions while you're doing that reading, and if you have a few different readings for the week, but you know that tutorial is going to be focused on one particular topic, read with that in mind. I would also really encourage you to think about what you already know. When you start to engage in reading academic texts, it can be a very overwhelming process of feeling as though you are always the kind of dumbest person in the hypothetical room, that you are somehow below or less intelligent than the authors that you are reading. What I would like you to do is ignore that and try to think about the core information that you are coming into this process with and how that can help you contextually understand what that reading is trying to say. So think also in relation to lecture content, any other information that you might have, tutorial content, anything that you have picked up along the way. And also, if you achieve any milestones for your reading, reward yourself. I know that there are some people who, if they have big textbooks to read, they put like lollies on particular pages. I think that would get sticky, but that's not my problem. So we also then have our 5-point reading plan. So this is just a general guideline for how we kind of recommend that you might start to engage with academic reading, especially if you have a lot of reading to do and you're doing that reading for research purposes. So that is, you will then need to recontextualize that information for your own argument. So first is predicting. So using the knowledge like the title, the abstract, and your purpose for reading to predict whether this book or reading will actually be relevant for you. The number one way for you to waste time in academia, and I have done this a lot myself, is to get 15 pages into a 20-page reading and realize they are actually never ever going to talk about the thing that you think they're going to talk about, right? So you want to avoid the amount of time wasted. You can then also skim. So skim through for keywords that relate to your topic. So open up the reading, skim for any key terminology, keywords, and then you'll know where exactly you want to pay attention in terms of the paragraphs. Scanning, so if the skim is relevant, read the introduction and the conclusion, and then maybe the first sentence of every paragraph to get a general understanding of what this article is trying to say. Then you move on to analysing. So if you see that these sentences and the intro conclusions are relevant, this is where you spend time on it by analysing it closely. This is where you will engage, you will read the paragraphs, you will read the entirety of your book. And then finally, noting. So noting down key ideas and why they are relevant. So some students do these in different orders, but I would recommend that if you are overwhelmed by the sheer amount that you have to read, which you may be, and that's okay, consider skimming and scanning before you engage very deeply in the process of analysing or note-taking. And then there are some questions that you can also ask yourself by reading. And what this does is help you to focus in on the purpose of what exactly you are trying to find out. So what is the aim of the author? What message is the author trying to send? What are the main arguments? Are the arguments supported by evidence? Sometimes they're not. Is the evidence reliable? Sometimes it isn't. Did the author influence your opinion? Were you convinced by their arguments? What were the limitations of the study? What other researchers have to say? And can you use the information from the text for your own assignment? So it is very easy to become overwhelmed by the kind of the sheer amount of words on a page, especially when you're looking at a 14-page journal article that you're attempting to read for the first time. Reading with questions in mind essentially helps to limit your focus so that you can ensure that you are actually gaining relevant information out of the process of reading. If you need further help on reading and critical thinking, the Student Learning Support Service, this is the flow page, which I'm sure Grace showed you in the previous session. You can access it via our website. So again, Google SLSS Flinders and you will find it. But we have some extra resources on reading and critical thinking. So let's think now about writing. So writing is something that you will be doing a lot of at university, regardless of what degree you're going into. Just out of curiosity, what degrees generally are we going into? You can just shout out. Engineering? Business? Masters of Counselling? Criminology? Business? Archaeology? Amazing. Okay, so we have a wide range, which is great. Every single one of you will have to write something within your degree, even if you don't want to, even if it feels like pulling teeth. I studied film, or critical film analysis, and all I did was write essays in undergrad. So we have a lot of writing to do. And academic writing is essentially the process through which you demonstrate your critical thinking and your research skills. So you can think about it as not necessarily the craft of writing that you are getting marked on. It's your ability to convey your own ideas and your ability to convey your research. That's what we're looking for when we mark your essays. So academic arguments are very key. So again, claims that are justified with evidence. Most often you will be presenting an argument in your written work, even if it is a case study, even if it's a report, even if it's a piece of reflective writing, you will likely be presenting an argument. And that, again, doesn't necessarily mean an argument that suggests I'm right and you're wrong. It could just be an argument that is, this is what I think, and this is how I'm supporting it. But there are many forms and genres of academic writing, but the process of tackling a written assessment remains fairly consistent. And it essentially follows these 5 steps. And you will notice that writing is actually only one of them. So the first thing that we need to do is analyze. And that essentially just means look at your rubric, look at your instructions, look at the essay question, look at the information on flow. All right, and what we're going to do from there is we are going to make sure that we actually understand what it is we're being asked to do, okay? This is honestly the most important part of the writing process, is making sure that you correctly understand what exactly is being asked of you. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do scoping searches, which essentially just means getting your keywords from your essay question, keywords from your readings, and you're going to put those into the library search, or you can put those into Google or Google Scholar, and you're going to get a general or broad understanding of what other people have to say about the topic that you're writing. We then move into the planning stage, which is where we're going to do what every undergrad hates doing, which is writing an essay plan, or at least writing a few dot points about what exactly it is you plan on writing. Then we move into the writing phase. Then we move into the editing and proofreading phase. So analysing something essentially means breaking it down into its component parts to see how it all works as a whole. When you have an essay question, there are a few things that you will want to look for. Number 1 is content words. These are words that relate to the topic, okay? If you are writing, for example, about social work, and you've been asked to do a case study, and you've been asked to look at the client and analyse whether or not they would be eligible under an NDIS plan, okay? What you're essentially looking for in that essay question is the words that relate to the content. So in that context, it would be client, it might be NDIS, okay? Now the limiting words, these are words that like dates, words that narrow the scope of your research, okay? So an essay question might be, should higher education be free in Australia. In that context, higher education would be our content word. A limiting word would be in Australia, okay? So we're not saying globally, we're saying in this area of the world. That will help to narrow down your research. And then we will also want to look for instructional words. These are your words like examine, discuss, analyze, to what extent. These are the words that are essentially telling you what they would like you to do with the content, okay? So you need to be aware of these because there are small but sometimes significant differences between a question that asks you to analyze versus a question that asks you to describe, okay? You need to be aware of what exactly it is you're being asked to do so that you can fulfill the requirements of the rubric and so that you can meet the learning outcomes. When we have our scoping and brainstorming process, this is where we start the research process. Start with the resources or the readings that you've been given, and then we can analyze for key terms that we can then start keying into the library search so that you can get a feel for the broader topic and the conversations around it. This is what the library search looks like. This is what Find It at Flinders looks like. You can access that or find it via OTCA. You can also access it and find it via your student system. And then also you can just Google Flinders Library and it's the first thing that'll come up. So essentially we have a lot of ways that we can filter our results. So you can filter for peer review, you can filter for online availability, you can filter for in-person availability if you'd like to read in person. So you want to keep this in mind, and this is going to be your first kind of port of call for when you start that research process. We then have planning, which is the thing that everyone hates doing but is arguably the most important part of the process. Good planning stages focus your research, writing, and reading. So you can try a mind map, you can try linear planning, you can try free writing, which is essentially just scribbling on a page. You can try an essay plan, you can try a bullet point list. Try to get your ideas out on the paper before you start actually writing them down. It is so much easier to construct a piece of writing once you already have an idea of the shape of that writing. Take it from me, I am writing my PhD thesis at the moment, and I started it no plan, just off the dome. I'll figure it out as I go along, and I'm paying for that now. So what we want to do is make sure that we have a clear vision before we go into it. And when it comes to writing, what I would really hammer home is that I think that oftentimes we misinterpret or misunderstand what academic writing should look like. What I would like you to focus on is formal but simple language. You want to avoid overly complicated sentences. You want to avoid overly complicated language. Your goal is not to mirror the writing of the authors that you're reading in class. Your goal is to be understood, okay? Understood by your peers and understood by your tutor. We also want to avoid generalizations. So this might be me saying, everyone in this room is bored. I was like, well, I don't know that, right? So we want to make sure that we are avoiding these kind of grand sweeping statements. You also want to express your ideas using the shortest and most direct words and phrases possible, okay? Especially if you're doing science writing or if you're doing analytical writing. You want to be as specific as you possibly can, okay? And you want to let the material be complex, but not your writing. Okay, so use your language to demonstrate logic, but you don't necessarily have to be Foucault in order to be a good academic writer. And then finally, editing and proofreading. So editing is just at the macro level, so that's content accuracy and clarity. That is your basic that you should be doing. Even if you're writing the essay the night before, you should always, ideally, look for content accuracy at the very least. Proofreading is at that micro level, so that's mechanics, your spelling and your grammar, and you can explore strategies for both of those. Again, if you need further support on this, we have a lot of skills, academic writing skills on the SLSS flow page. We also have a lot that specifically has to do with how to construct well-constructed paragraphs. So if that's something you'd like to look into, head over there. We also have referencing at university, and I'm going to speed through this relatively quickly because the information is relatively dry, but also, I hope, simple to understand. So the reason that we reference at university is so that we can adhere to something that is called academic integrity. Okay? Academic integrity is the practice of being honest and fair when we're writing and submitting work at university, and we maintain academic integrity by referencing where our ideas have come from. Okay? So essentially what this means is if you have learned information from an external source and you are using that information to make an argument, you then have to reference where that information was originally created. So we have a values and ethos thing that you can look at some point if it feels important to you, but integrity is one of our 4 core values. But essentially why we reference is to acknowledge the work of others. It's also to enable someone to access the same resources as you. So if you come up with a really cool idea and you use some really cool information, as your marker, I might just want to read that journal article. It's also to show that you've conducted thorough and balanced research. It's to meet the requirements of academic integrity, but it's also to situate our work in an academic context. It's so that we can understand the context from which you are creating knowledge. And when you reference when you are using an idea that is not originally your own. You reference if you're paraphrasing. So that means using somebody else's information and putting it in your own words. That still needs to be referenced. And you reference if you're quoting directly, okay? And you don't just reference words, you reference ideas, okay? That is very important for academic study. It is not just if you are using language that somebody else has not created, but is put in that order. You are referencing ideas, okay? Referencing comes in a lot of different styles. Majority of you will likely use APA 7. I think BGL, engineering definitely, archaeology also, I think social work too. Everyone uses APA 7 basically these days, but pay attention to the referencing system that you're being asked to use, yeah? APA 7 is essentially the style through, ignore Godzilla, the style through which you will reference. So I will get it up very quickly so that you can have a look at it. There we go. So APA 7 is essentially the way that you organize your references. And if you need a copy of this, you can Google SLSS APA 7 guide. It's essentially just the way that you organize the information so that we can then understand where that information has come from. All right, now I've lost my mouse. All right, and if you need, again, help with referencing, integrating evidence, head over there. Okay, now let's look at time management. My time management, I think, is fine. I think I've got 20 minutes. Let's talk about due date tactics. So time management is very complex and it's related to patterns of behavior that include number 1, procrastination, that's me, motivation, overcommitting, perfectionism, avoidance, and then also not being realistic about time. Hopefully I've called at least every single one of you out on that list, okay? So we all have these issues, but time management is behavioral. It's about building and practicing behaviors that allow you to overcome these, let's say, shortfalls, which we all have. And the way that we do that is primarily being realistic about the actual time that we have in which to achieve what needs to be achieved, okay? So the first thing that we need to do is understand what your semester actually looks like. Is everybody in here enrolled in all of their topics? Yes? Has everybody in here seen their timetable? Fantastic. So Essentially, the way that that timetable plays out is that most courses are based on a 13 to 14 week semester, okay? The first few weeks of your semester will be dedicated to settling in and getting into the rhythm of study, all right? You won't necessarily be asked to do much except keep up with your course readings in this time. Now, weeks 6 to 7 are when your first big assessments are usually due, all right? You can basically count that your big assessments will be due before your mid-semester break, which in semester 2 is in week 8, and then before the end of semester. The reason that this happens is so that your tutors have time over those breaks to actually mark your work, all right? So you can expect that if you have 2 big assessments due for each topic, they will come at around week 7, and then again at around week 10 to 14. All of your assessments will be clustered around those dates. And it's something that you can be aware of now so that you're not surprised by it later, all right? So assignments cluster around your mid-semester break and your final weeks of semester, and how we cope with this. I mean, really, this is about your ability to self-organize. However, what I would suggest that you do, get a diary or a phone calendar to map your weekly schedule. So I would suggest that you put your timetable in an external calendar now so that you know what your time every day actually looks like, your contact hours, how they're actually going to play out. And I would also recommend that you have a look at a semester planner. So this is the FUSA 2025 student planner. We are here week semester 2, and I would really recommend getting one of these. You can find them at Flinders Connect and level 1 of the library. And I would recommend, as soon as you can, putting in your due dates. They should be on Flow if your Flow site is live, which it should be. I would really recommend having a look at your assessment hub or your assessment portals and taking note of your due dates. Putting them in a planner like this, putting them in a phone calendar, whatever works for you, so that you can see them. The worst thing to do is to let yourself be surprised by when things are due, all right? And I say this from so much experience. And then what we can do then is what we call mapping a plan to completion. And this is a process that you will likely want to undertake a little bit closer to when those due dates are actually set, when you have a little bit more experience with what is actually required of you for those assessments. But what you want to do is consider length, weighting, and research requirements of that assignment and work backwards to find out when you will actually begin working on the assignment, okay? This can prevent cramming, writing the night before, which I will not lie, you will likely all do at one point, okay? I am not saying this to have you avoid the kind of very natural processes of being an undergraduate. What I am saying is that it can relieve some stress if you have some scaffolding around when the individual components of your assessment will be completed. And the basic ones are your planning start date. So when you are going to open up Canvas, look at the assessment, decide how you're going to tackle it. Your research start date, so when am I actually going to begin the process of going on Google Scholar, going on the library website, looking at what's required of me. Your draft start date, so when do I want to actually start writing? And then your editing start date, so when do I think I want to start editing? And this is what you may want to create for especially your months that will cluster around those really busy periods. So I have backwards mapped for an assessment, just one, okay? And as you can see, it takes or can take quite a long time to actually get from the beginning to the end of an assessment. It may not take you this long. You may be a faster writer, but a slower reader. You might read very quickly, but plan really slowly, okay? Take these things into consideration when you are planning, but at least having in your calendar when your assessment is due and when you plan to actually start working on it, can be really, really helpful for organising that time. And moreover, your university timetable can be very deceiving because your university contact hours will only take up a few hours a week, but your time will then fill up with your other commitments, okay? And those other commitments will be other work that you need to get done to keep succeeding in your course. So that might be, you might have weekly forum posts, you might have weekly quizzes, you may have weekly readings that you all have to do. You might have weekly discussions that you have to engage with. And these all take up time on your calendar as well. So you want to be strategic about your schedule. So explore how you work best and schedule it accordingly. You want to study according to cognitive research, so 1 to 2 hour study sessions with short breaks. Account for life events, and that includes travel, work, literally eating. You know, keep these in mind when you are writing your schedule. For example, it is useless to set a study session from 6 to 7 p.m. unless you are going to have dinner while you are also studying, okay? So you want to keep these things in mind and be realistic, because ultimately, when you make a plan, you'll fail at the plan, and that's okay. But what we want to do is maximize our opportunity to succeed with this schedule. And then also be very flexible. So you may want to start a weekly planner, but as you can see, it isn't just those green contact hours that we actually have on. There are a lot of things that we need to keep into consideration when we are actually auditing for our time. It may seem excessive to include these things in a calendar. For me personally, it helps me to actually understand how much time I have to do a certain task so that I don't overcommit myself. And the way that we can kind of do this is by chunking our responsibilities. So chunking is a time management and organizational process that breaks projects into smaller and easily achievable tasks. So this is a part of the process of backwards mapping. We also want to space out our study sessions. So if you space out your learning, you memorize and understand it better. So this is the opposite of cramming. We want to avoid the I'm staying up until 4 a.m. the night before an exam, cramming for that exam. It is easier for your body to physically process the information, for your brain to process the information if you do it slower over a longer period of time. You can also space out your study. So the Pomodoro technique is a time management method that breaks work into intervals. So traditionally 25 minutes in length that are separated by short breaks of 5 minutes. You can customize this technique however it suits you. So it might work better for you to do an hour and then a 15-minute break, or it might work better for you to do 25 minutes and a 5-minute break. And there are also a lot of really cute Pomodoro timers that you can use to stay productive. This is one that I use sometimes when I'm doing my essay writing. I make it full screen and I don't let myself see anything except the time ticking down. So that can be really helpful. There are also a lot of streamers that do Pomodoro like co-working sessions, if that is helpful for you. It is also nice to do it with your friends. That's a little Simsy because I watch Sims YouTube, so we'll just move on from that. But essentially, there are a lot of strategies that you can use to help you in the process of managing your time. And then finally, the last piece of advice that I would say is that writing is really hard. It is like pulling teeth sometimes. It is a lot of people's least favorite part of studying. And it's okay that it is hard. It is supposed to be. So some tips that I have to try to minimize the amount of difficulty it will be is to jot down your ideas. So keep a notebook handy to make notes and ideas as they come to you. This is especially helpful in tutorial settings, workshop settings, or lab settings. Any setting that you will be freely communicating with your classmates or your teachers, these are times in which you have ideas about what exactly you are going to be writing about. Read more. If you feel stuck or if you feel like you don't know what you want to say, have another look at your readings, have another look at the library website. If you don't have content to write, spend more time in the research phase. Talk to yourself. I find talking to myself and recording it can sometimes be helpful, or talking to others and talking through your ideas with your peers can really help to clarify your thoughts. Write while anxious. It will likely give you a certain level of anxiety to sit down and write something, especially if you feel as though you don't know the content entirely. My advice for you would be to just do it anyway. Don't wait for the anxiety to go away because it might not. So sit with the discomfort of writing, the discomfort of having a bad first draft. All first drafts are bad. And give yourself enough time to make that draft better. Trial different modes of writing. So you can try writing really informally, so just in dot points. You can try writing for a non-expert audience. You can write to explain to your parents, whatever helps you get the ideas on the page. And then finally try changing location. So some people work really well in the library because it's silent. Some people hate it because it's too quiet. Some people write well from bed. Some people write well from the kitchen table. If you are getting stuck or you're in a rut, changing your physical location can really help. And if you are dealing with your workload, so you have a lot of subjects, a lot of assessments, try some planning methods. If you're dealing with isolation, try to find a study group, bless you, or check in with your cohort. If you are struggling with feedback, which is something that can come as a little bit of a shock, take a step back for 24 hours and let things process and settle before you act on the feedback that you receive. Communicate with your lecturer or your supervisor or your close circle. And the best advice I can give you is just ask for help if you need it. We are here to help you. Level 2 of the Central Library, if you ever need a hand with writing, with referencing, with even just talking over your thoughts on an essay. But finally, have fun. So that's me done for now. Do you have any questions for me? 9? Okay, perfect. Well then you are free to go, unless you want to hear me yap about AI in like 5 minutes. But thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate it. And I'll be here for the next 10 minutes if you want to come up and talk to me, because people usually do. All right.
Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.